Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce and John Orr, where we help high net income individuals grow their wealth into a legacy that lasts generations through hidden investment and tax secrets your financial advisors won't believe are true.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to yet another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast. And as you heard on the intro, we're going to dig a little deeper. I know recently we shared an episode about building an emergency fund. And, the whole purpose of that episode was because a lot of folks like you and I, John, kind of heavily ignored this idea of an emergency fund for quite some time. And now I don't know if it's our kids are getting a little older, if it's just that we're getting a little older, but ultimately we're kind of backtracking and we've been kind of creating a bit of a safety net for ourselves. I don't know if it's just seeking that feeling of certainty. We have these other assets that are growing. We wanted to make sure that we had a safety net in place, but at the same time, we didn't want to kind of have that itch of like seeing money sitting there doing nothing. So we talked about supercharging your emergency fund. And in this episode, we're going to look at how you could potentially take an approach like that and you can leverage it to build and work towards other purchasing decisions, other big financial decisions, while still not having to sacrifice the additional bonus, that optimizing, that wealth optimizing that we created through that specific episode. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go back and check out how to supercharge your emergency fund. And we also found a way to kind of supercharge our investments at the same time. Whereas today, we're going to look at a slightly different angle using the same theory in order to take care of some of the lifestyle choices that we make. And today we're going to focus on vehicles. But, as we mentioned in the intro, it's not just vehicles. It can really be any sort of purchase, any sort of expense, and how we can use the flexibility of this strategy in order to help us feel more safe in the short term, but then also get some massive benefits in the long term as well.
That's what I love about, what we talked about last time and specifically what we're talking about this time is that we are really thinking about how do I build my wealth and do these other things, at the same time. And that's really the key for us for the last, few episodes, but also what you're saying, like what we've been doing lately in terms of our financial planning for ourselves and the clients that we're working with. So it's like, I always want to ask that question. It's like, if I want to do that, how can I do that and build my wealth at the same time? So it's like, how do I invest in real estate? How do I do that and build some other ways for wealth planning and at the same time? How do I pay for my child's university or post-secondary, schooling? How can I do that and still build my wealth at the same time? So there's, like you said, there's a lot of different large purchases that we can make, or even some small purchases we can make, but also set ourselves up for future financial success, future financial generational wealth is what we're trying to talk about. So that's that underlying question is, how do I build wealth, but also do all these other things we still have to do in our life?
I love it. And, something that I want to also make sure that we sort of continue to draw a line in the sand and differentiate what we talk about here versus what you might hear in some other shows. You'll notice that, while we've used the term infinite banking in some previous episodes, like we are not like very like aggressive infinite bankers by any means. We use a very similar tool, a tool that they leverage in infinite banking, but our approach here is much more holistic, right? Like we're looking at the whole picture, and by no means are we suggesting that, using this particular strategy we're going to talk about today is perfect for everyone, nor is it the only thing that we should be doing, right? So if somebody's listening in and you're just, I've heard some podcasts that talk about infinite banking, for example, and, they've got people there just talking about how it's almost like they're like scared of investing in anything other than whole life policies. And I feel like that's sort of like a really, really, really super ultra conservative approach, which is not that smart. It's better than nothing, right? It's better than not doing anything. But ultimately, like you should be looking at, hey, I want to I want to work towards wealth building. Part of that's going to involve different alternative assets, right? So some of them are going to be straight Main Street. Maybe you have a tax-free savings account or RSP. We're not saying not to do those things. Those are not what we're going to be talking about today. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of build on some of the things that we can do to get some bonus out of some of these expenses that might arise in our everyday life. And we also want to make sure that everything we share here are ideas that should always the decisions that you make when you decide to start something, how it happens later should always be adjusted based on the scenario. So for example, some infinite bankers might say, hey, if you set up a participating whole life policy, the purpose is to create your own banking system and all of these things. And hey, that's great. The flexibility and I would say the confidence that you build when you have access to capital like that, that's still growing at a reasonable over time, compounding at about 4 to 5% over the life of a policy. Like that's fantastic. Like I'll take that any day over putting money into GICs or putting them into CDs or any of those fixed, sort of interest bearing assets. However, on the other hand, you want to take the financing terms that make the most sense to you at the time. Right. So that's something like an infinite banker may kind of push back against this. No, you never get the banks out of your life is what some would say. Even Nelson Nash in his book say that, they're snakes, or the dragons or whatever he calls them, that we want to get them out of our life and we want to get them out of our life as quickly and fast as possible. Hey, if you want to go that route, rock and roll. On this podcast, we're going to be talking about how we can use that tool, participating whole life, to help us grow our investments, our savings, our safety, as well as, and one of the big pieces here is our actual wealth for full family wealth, meaning not just money, but also just how we live our lives and how, good we feel with our families and our friends, but then also to be able to eventually develop some sort of legacy that we can leave behind. And, there's a lot of responsibility that goes along with that. So just want to make sure we're clear before we dive in that you're not going to hear us talking about how we're going to set this thing up and this is the only way to do it. Guess what? We're going to give you a scenario where we're going to say, hey, if the bank offers you this, here's what you're going to do at that time in order to make sure that you still benefit on both ends and you walk away wealthier at the end than you did had you not used this particular tool.
Yeah, so let's dive into some of those scenarios to think about how do I buy a car? If I'm in the market for a car, I know I need to eventually purchase a vehicle. We all have that. It's one of our largest expenses that we have to make. And let's say that I'm personally looking at buying this car and for our family, maybe it's a family car, maybe it's like, what? I just want the sports car that I've always wanted. Like we're not car people.
This is what makes this episode hard for us, right? Because we're like, how would people buy a really expensive or what we consider to be a really expensive car? Because we don't care.
We're gonna pick the even though actually, Kyle, my last 2 cars were brand new cars, but they're more functional, choices than say buying a car kind of car. I guess that's kind of a funny way to say it, but
well, and I don't know if you're like your family is like mine, right? Like you have 3 daughters, they're a little older than my kids, but like I'm the type of person that my car, the inside of it's a disaster. And it's like almost like every time I clean it,
mine too.
I'm like, I feel like I wasted time because it's like that, by the next weekend, it's completely destroyed. I come out.
I hate shopping for cars.
I hate shopping. I see a new scratch on the car, all of these things. And like, I just don't care enough about them. So I don't let that bother me, but that also impacts like my purchasing decisions. Like, I'm like, I actually don't want to, quote unquote, as some people would call it, invest in the lifestyle choice of a nice car because it doesn't actually make me happy. And therefore I would much rather put, funds into other things. Right. Remember the gold bar scenario I talked about on one of the podcasts. I'm just hugging gold bars. But ultimately here, we're going to take a scenario, John, and we're going to like build one out. And one thing that we have to also say is like, we're building out this scenario based on a lot of hypotheticals here, right? Like we're
Right.
just trying to give you another scenario. So in the last episode where we're supercharged an emergency fund, here we're going to kind of like use a little bit of the same premise as to where this policy may have started from. I'll be honest and say, like, I don't have necessarily a par whole life policy set up with the intent of it being used to purchase vehicles with. But that's also because I buy cars like you do, John, that I can usually pay off fairly quickly, like within a year, 18 months. Like I'm not concerned about, the interest or the arbitrage. However, I have par whole life policies for other purposes, right? And I
But you
could
could.
leverage them
That's
and
what I was going
use
to
this
say.
strategy, right? So I just want to make sure everyone's clear here that we're not saying like everyone should go run out and do this. This might be, it might resonate with you where you go, well, I do typically buy a car every X number of years. Maybe
Right.
this is a strategy that I want to do where I can still get what I want, which is a reasonably nice car, but also benefit my wealth in the longer run as well. So get that dollar kind of doubling, right? Where
Yeah.
you get to like
Right.
get it to get the car, and it's not like a dollar that never returns back to you ever again. And this would just ultimately give you maybe a little bit of an opportunity to kind of go, you know what? I'm going to start this journey in order to reach this particular goal, which resonates with you, because some of you aren't. That last episode, maybe investing in the S&P 500 didn't resonate with you, and that's fine. Maybe buying a car does, and that might be motivation to get you started on a journey like this.
Yeah, and I think the $2, the two uses of every dollar, I think is for a lot of us, I think a huge motivator to go like, because if you don't utilize any of these strategies or this particular tool today, then when you go to buy your next car, well, let's say you just bought a car and it's 5 years from now, it's like Kyle's gonna kind of run through a scenario, but like maybe you should start thinking about that now and setting yourself up for that financial future, but also available to buy the car. Because if you don't, 5 years from now is going to come and you're going to be like, I got to turn in this car, I got to trade in the car, get a new car, or, like whatever that time is. It's like, well, now I have a few choices to make, right? Like, how do we traditionally buy cars? What are some of our methods? It's either I have the cash sitting here. Okay, awesome. I have the cash sitting here, but that's not a lot of us. So it's like, well, do I go and use my home equity line of credit to buy the car and I can control how to pay that back? That could be an option for you. Or it's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to get a loan from the bank. I'm going to get a loan from the bank and I'm going to go and I'm going to buy that car. Whereas I don't get flexibility usually. And when that loan gets paid for, or how much to pay off, there's like a loss of flexibility there. It's usually a set time, or I'm going to get the loan from the dealer itself. And then that same thing is true where I'm paying back their set, amount on their rate. I don't have a lot of flexibility here. So those are my choices, but ultimately all of those choices, that when you take that dollar, and use it to buy the car and use it to pay off the interest of that car, that dollar is using it in that one way. It pays off the interest or it pays for the car itself. Whereas the strategy we're talking about, when Kyle's going to run through a scenario here on that, it's that same dollar is being used twice. And that's the real key here. If you want to build wealth and buy a car, then these are the strategies you want to think about, whether they make sense for you. If you're just looking to buy a car and you don't need to buy, build your wealth, you're probably not the person listening to this podcast right now. You're here because you want to do both.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say too, the other piece is, I know there's a lot of listeners there to like, listen, I'm not really concerned about, a car payment because they are high enough income earners that it's like, this is a non-factor. However, why I think those friends might want to listen here is because some of the strategies we're going to be unpacking, especially those in future episodes that really apply to business owners with corporations, are going to leverage a similar tool, and you'll have sort of like a head start on that learning. So this is good learning around the tool and how it works, because a lot of people look at participating whole life or any permanent whole life or any permanent insurance products as sort of a black box. And because they're like a black box, you can listen to some folks like Dave Ramsey out there who hates them. And, he's clearly shown in his videos when he explains how they work that he actually doesn't have a clear understanding of how they can be structured. And how they can be used and leveraged. And I wonder, Dave Ramsey doesn't believe there's any good debt out there, which suggests that maybe that's why he doesn't like this strategy at all. So that's real estate investors right away are not Dave Ramsey followers, right? Because you are building your wealth based on a leverage strategy. So we're applying that here. So our real estate friends love Par Whole Life because of the advantages it builds and the fact that inside the policy, it grows tax free, which is fantastic. So we're going to look at a scenario here. Those are on YouTube. I didn't make it pretty this time, so you don't have to go there. We're not going to dig straight into the weeds here, but we are going to talk about some of the summaries and some of the details. And it's more or less for John and I to kind of structure the conversation and make sure we're on the same page here. But what I went and did is I was thinking to myself, I'm like, first of all, it's crazy. I heard someone recently, we were at a hockey tournament, and they told me how much their car payment was. I'm not going to repeat it, but it was a lot. And I was like, holy smokes, these car payments, first of all, they're stretching them out over like 96 months now. And they're like a lot. Like you're hearing leases are like $800 a month now. So car payments are often, over $1,000, sometimes, all kinds of craziness. So again, makes my heart flutter a little bit because I'm just not a believer in cars and I don't like throwing money away. But here we are. So we're going to look at this strategy. And basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use the power of a participating whole life insurance policy, keeping in mind that insurance is designed for the death benefit. However, with permanent life products like participating whole life, as we've said in the past, they have living benefits. And the living benefit is that it gains value. The present value of this particular policy will continue to grow over time at a fairly predictable rate, right? We say fairly because each and every year, just like a company's dividends, like when Bell Canada releases their dividends, you don't know exactly what it's going to be, but they try to keep it as consistent as possible because that's what makes it a blue chip stock. The same is true with insurance policies. So they can't guarantee what the dividend's going to be like, but these companies have paid dividends since they began these policies.
Like 100 years.
Yeah, like Sun Life is like over 100 years that they've been doing this work. Equitable Life is a newer company, but they've been doing this for decades upon decades. And again, much longer than many of your blue chip stocks that are putting out dividends each and every year. So with that in mind, it's a rock solid. And again, we talk about it as like a foundation. And you'll notice in the intro, we were talking about the safety that it provides in the short term. So again, I'm kind of approaching this like I'm going, okay, in my head, I don't think I would personally set up a participating whole life insurance policy specifically just to purchase vehicles in the future. Like, I don't feel like for me that would make sense. However, I would consider taking my emergency fund, like we talked about last time, building a policy around my emergency fund that I want to have access to. So it's growing over time. And then as it grows to a point where there's too much money in it, where I might want to leverage it for bigger purchases like a vehicle. So this policy here today, we switched it up. We didn't want to keep it the same as last time. So we're going to change how we're approaching this policy. This particular individual is 41. And it rounds to your closest birthday. So I'm wondering who that might be. Oh, it's me that I ran this on. So 41 years old currently. And we're going to put in, and I'm planning in my mind right now, and I can change this. I can fund this for the rest of life, as we found in the last example with the emergency fund. For this one, I'm going to plan to fund this thing for 15 years. And at the 15-year mark, we're just going to let the dividends pay the base premium for this policy and just let it ride. However, you know what I would do if I had extra money sitting around in year 16, I'd probably be continuing to fund it because that's a nice bump to the cash value. And then I would potentially use it for whatever purposes I want. But here we're going to assume we're going to go 15 years and we're just not going to even consider any of those things. Okay. So we're going to put $9,600 in per year. And some people might be like, well, where'd you get that number from? And like, where am I going to find that money from? Well, guess what? If you plan on buying a car, especially a new car and we'll call it middle ground car, like a nicer car, well, you better figure out where you're going to get that money from. Because guess what? that's $800 a month. And
Right.
that's just a lease payment for a new, truck
Right.
or SUV. So
Now
you
I
better
want,
find it.
yeah, exactly. But I also want to like just throw this caveat in here that, when Kyle, you just said, we're going to fund this for 15 years. And remember that we're here to not just fund the purchase of a car. We're doing two things at once, right? We're trying to
Yes,
build our wealth, but also utilize building our wealth to fund a car purchase. So when you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be paying $800 a month for the next 15 years to buy one car. No, don't think of it like that. Remember that we're doing two things at once. We're building our wealth while we're going to create this machine that allows us to buy a car and
I love
do
it.
do those two things at once.
I love it. And I would say in the very immediate short term, like I said, it's like for me, it would be like emergency fund money, like
Right.
I'm going to like funnel it into here. Maybe you have an emergency fund already and you go, oh, well, all right,
Right.
I'm going to funnel it over here and just place it over there. And it's not money out of my pocket. I'm just going to do that for the next few years until I'm ready to buy my car. So very, very important, as John had mentioned. So over time, as you found out last time, the first few years, they start slow. Intentionally, they front load a lot of the hassle, the expenses, and so forth, because these insurance companies, they're investing in longer term assets. So it's a big issue for them if you bail on your policy in year two, right? They're going like, you bail in year two, you're going to suffer the consequence, because they're like, this is a permanent policy. Like, it's supposed to be here until you die. That's supposed to be like why you're doing it. So if you change your mind in the first 12, 18, even 36 months, it's not going to be a good move, right? However, by year five, typically the way we structure policies, you'd be at about a break even point. If you did decide you're like, you know what, I changed my mind, I want to take my, all my chips and run home, you could do that. Again, I still feel like that's like 5 years of like kind of waste that, that you did this. So this is a longer strategy. Like John's saying, we're building this thing, but we want to think about like some of these future purchases that we might need to make in life. I say need because some people need a brand new car that costs a lot of money, and other people like us, we just kind of deal with what we got. But as I go here, you can see we're funding this thing out. So it's $9,600 per year. And I'm going to say that by like in year 7, you decide at that point, your total cash value is about $72,000. All right. Now, this is based on current dividend rates. So that can be a little higher. It might be a little lower. It's going to, but it's not going to go backwards. That's one thing we know for certain. Okay. So that's one thing we know. It's not going to go down like where you like start losing more money each year. It can't happen. So this is a really nice, reliable tool in that way. And I'm going to just go ahead and like, I'm going to buy this car and I'm going to buy it in cash for $60,000. What I've done in the past, when I go and buy a car cash, I often do that. I come in and I usually try to negotiate the car, assuming there's financing. And then I'll throw in the last item, which is, hey, if I come in with cash, how does that change things? And in some cases, they might say, actually, you know what, if you finance, the cost of the car is actually lower because we're going to get some interest, and I'll do a quick calculation, and vice versa. So you might want to have that discussion before you say, hey, I'm going to put the money on the table. But assume you bought it for $60,000. What we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to look at this $60,000, and we're actually going to go ahead and we're going to be aggressive in this first scenario. Okay. We're going to be aggressive and we're going to say, okay, we're still funding our policy each year. That's $800 a month.
Well, let's be clear, just for say any of our new listeners, if you're a new listener, you didn't, this is where the two uses of every dollar comes into play, Kyle, right? Is that the $60,000 isn't I've gone to my policy and pulled it from the policy and put the 60,000, which means like when you said I had $72,000 there, it's like, it's not like I subtracted the 60 from the 72. There's still $72,000 in my cash value of the policy. We actually don't touch it. It will grow year to year to year, unaffected, compounding every single year. You're not touching that money. That's the key here. If you were comparing this to another way to save for this car, right? If you were saving to buy this car outright, or you're putting money away, you might be putting it in a savings account. When you actually go to take that money out, it's gone. Like, it doesn't get that compounding effect anymore. You reduced the actual principal value of that account, and that now can only grow at the whatever's left. That doesn't, it's
Yes.
not happening here. Same thing. If you put this money over in a stock, in the S&P, and let that grow, when you pull it out, it doesn't grow at the same, at that same principle. You've taken the money out. It's gone.
Right.
It's now going in the car. Whereas right now we're not. We're actually getting a third-party loan or a policy loan, which is a key move here to make the machine work in your favor to get the two uses of every dollar.
I love it. I love it. And it's so important to make that distinction because again, I sometimes assume, people know this, but as you're saying, that is so key because it's like your policy cash value is going to continue compounding. Like you said, I'm going to borrow against that cash value, just like
Collateral.
yeah, exactly. Just like when you get a loan, you're borrowing against the value of the car, right? Like you're borrowing against that. You're not just getting a loan. And the reason why car loans often are much higher, unless it's a brand new car and there's some sort of incentive program going on, usually what's happening is you're getting a higher interest rate against a car because cars go down in value, right? So they're like, listen, if you don't make your payments, all of a sudden it's like we're stuck with this car and it's not worth as much as we thought it was going to be worth, or nearly as much as it was worth when you bought it. So that's why
Right.
car loans typically have higher interest rates. And it's the dealers that are working kind of behind the scenes and they're inflating the price of the vehicle to get 0% down. And we're going to talk about a scenario there as well. So they're just playing with numbers to make it look better on your end. But ultimately, at the end of the day, most banks, like, they don't want to lend money on a car. They would much rather lend money on a whole life policy because they know it's so hard, rock solid, and
You're
predictable.
going to die.
Right. And you are going to die. Like, unfortunately, again, as I'm sorry to inform some of you listening, this might be news, but that is something that you definitely want to be looking out for. So we've instead of taking a loan against the car, we've taken a loan against your insurance policy, which once again has super flexible terms. Okay. So right now, against your cash value of a life insurance policy, a particular company right now here in Canada is charging 6.5% simple interest. They apply it only at the end of the year. They don't apply it monthly like a home equity line or like a car loan. So there's a benefit there. Like, you're actually net ahead if you're getting a 6.5% car loan or a 6.5% HELOC, even though right now, as we talk about it, most HELOCs are over 8% right now. So if you borrowed against your house to buy a car, you would actually be net ahead borrowing against your cash value of your life insurance policy. Now, I also want to be clear that I say if, I'm going to say when, more or less, when we see rates starting to dip over time, this is my thought. My thought is, along with all of the other economists out there, I'm not an economist, but the thought is, and historically what we see is once inflation starts to get, stamped out like it is, we're going to see interest rates start to spike down relatively aggressively because the Fed's going to overdo it and the Bank of Canada is going to overdo it. So eventually you're going to see your HELOC will probably be back at, say, 4% or 3.5%. In that case, it might make sense to borrow against your house on a home equity line of credit. At that time, you make that choice. But right now, this is a great option for folks who might be using a home equity line or a personal line of credit where the rates are very high to buy a vehicle. So as we see here, we've got this car loan. It's $60,000. We're going to I'm going to call this aggressively pay this down by making $800 payments on the policy loan. Okay. Now, some of you are stopping. You're going, wait a second, Kyle. I thought we were funding the policy $800 a month. And the answer is yes, we are going to do that. That was a commitment we decided in this scenario. We're going to do that until year 15. We can adjust that as we go. We can decide if we want to go longer, we want to go a little less. That's totally up to you. However, that's what we had decided at the beginning here. And in this scenario, we thought, you know what? I want the benefit of this policy as it grows, as it comes into its most beneficial years, which is like year 10 and beyond, where this thing really turns into something powerful. I'm going to try to knock down this policy loan because I have the cash value available to me, and I'm still doing my other investing, and I'm still, you know what I mean? Like, we're not saying it's an either or here. We're not saying don't invest or don't, any of those things. We're just making our car payments. So we're making essentially $1,600 payments right now. Half
Right.
of it going to fund this policy and continue that work so we can build this wealth building tool and be able to reuse it later in life. And we're also going to knock down this policy loan. And what you're going to see is that it'll take us until about, it's like I set it up this way, John. It's like until year 15 when the car is fully paid off. Okay. The amount of interest we've paid is approximately the same as what it would be if you made car payments through, through the dealer. If they were giving you 6.5%, it's going to be a little better here because of simple interest. And wait a second, in year 15, we also stop making payments on this policy. So we had decided that when we started this policy, we were going to do this for 15 years, and we're going to put $800 a month in. And along the journey, we bought this car for $60,000, and then we made aggressive payments of $800 to pay that policy loan down. And now at year 16, I'm not putting any more money into this policy, and my car is completely mine, free and clear. I bought it for 60. It's probably worth 10 now. Congratulations. but it's paid off. And here we are in a normal scenario. And I get it. Like, we put 15 years of $800 a month, right? That's 144,000 into this policy. But that 144,000 will continue to grow over time. And actually by year 15, the total cash value is showing here as illustrated, just short of $200,000 worth of available cash flow. And I'm not going to put any more money into this policy, and it will just continue to compound over time so that I could buy another car if that's what you want to do in year 17 or 18 or whenever you choose. And guess what? You could buy an even more expensive car. We're not going to advocate that you do that, but it's your money. You get to decide, and you get to decide how you want to leverage it.
Or like, it's like you said, it's your money. It's sitting there in cash value. Every day it grows to be more than what it was the day before, guaranteed. And you could, after that time, you could start, say, withdrawing some of that money. You could,
Totally.
but you could also take a loan and start taking that money out as a policy loan, little bits to fund your lifestyle. And because there's a death benefit attached to this, and because if you plan this right, this is something to just think about, because it can be used for many different uses. It can be, say, something that funds the rest of your life a certain amount, and the death benefit will wipe out that loan.
I love it. I love it. And I want to, be very clear, because you said something, you used the word withdrawal again, and you've used that in previous episodes. And here's the thing though, John, you're right. I can withdraw. Like in year 16, I could take the 208,000-ish or so in year 16. I've only put 144 into the policy, right? And it's grown to 208,000. I can say, you know what? This has been fun, but I just, for whatever reason, it's like, I'm like Kyle, but instead of gold bars, I want stacks of cash under my mattress. Give it to me. Now, the only negative is, just like if this was a GIC that you put 144,000 into, and let's say at the end of the GIC term, you're getting your 144 plus the earning, which is in this case around $208,000. Guess what has to happen? The government takes their cut, because you have now taken a tax sheltered vehicle, which is supposed to be there to support your family, your estate, your legacy through the death benefit. And because we've chosen to withdraw it, we are now choosing to pay tax on it. If we borrow against it to fund our lifestyle, the beauty is that I'm not getting taxed on my loan. I am, quote unquote, paying this interest on this loan if I choose to never pay it back, right? So I would want to run the calculation on like how much can that be over time until I run out of money. And ultimately, I can do that tax free. And like you said, when we die, sadly, it's going to happen. When we die, that death benefit is going to be significant enough that it will wipe out the cash loan that you've had, the policy loan that you had, or it could be a third party loan. Because again, you can go to the big bank and say, hey, listen, I got this life insurance policy. Will you let me borrow against it? And they're going to say, I would love to. You're going to be like, do you need me to like get an appraisal like you would for a house? They're like, no. Do I need to prove to you how I'm going to pay you back? They're like, no, like you're going to die. It's fine. Like we'll just take the money then. In their mind, they're like, this is super safe. It's safer to them than a home is because they don't have to deal with trying to sell a home. They know that they will get their return and it's actually more predictable to them. So they're going to openly be willing to do it, even if you have no income coming in, because they'll just take the policy from you, right? Eventually, if you take too much or whatever happens, and you know, they will just that's their collateral and they're happy with it. So when I look at this and I go, okay, that's year 16. Let's fast forward to like year 25. We haven't used the policy for anything. We haven't borrowed against it since. You could have borrowed and paid back cars in between if you chose, right? If that's what you want to do. Or you didn't and you just let it sit. Again, I feel like it hurts my soul when I see such a high cash value sitting here and I didn't go, maybe I do a first mortgage private lending over here, or maybe I buy like this, you know, I put it into a real estate syndication where I'm going to earn 12%. I'm borrowing at 6.5 or less if I get a third party, you know, loan and I do the arbitrage over there. Like to me, it's like a sin to just let this money sit here, but some people choose. They're like, well, I like to have GICs and I like to feel good about it. Well, this does a great job of doing that. By year 25, I haven't put any additional funds in. So the original was 144,000 over the first 15 years. I had bought a car and I had paid it all back, right? And I'm now sitting at about 312,000 in cash value. The death benefit is approaching 600,000. So I can like leverage 90% of that 311,000 and I can invest it. I could leverage it all and like go, you know, buy a helicopter. I don't know how much a helicopter is. Maybe it's probably more than that, but I can go do whatever I want with it if I choose. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what I would recommend that you do is like if it's sitting there and there's a great investment opportunity, that would be something that I would highly consider. And of course, I would probably be picking things that cash flow, and I would probably take some of that cash flow and start paying back the loan. And once the loan's paid back, then you just have this other investment that's going. Like you see how you talked about taking $1 and turning it into $2. Like we're doing that again here. So it's like we got this machine, we, you know, bought a car, we used it for an emergency fund, then we bought a car with it, and then we paid that back, and then we decided it's getting big, and now we want to invest over here. Now I make this investment and I take any of the profits there and I pay back the policy loan. So now I have this cash value again, and I have that investment over here. You can see how the idea of compound interest really starts to snowball when you have the right tools in place. And that's not something that you can get when you just have a bunch of cash sitting in the bank and it's just sitting there losing value to inflation. And then I go and buy something and now I'm at zero again and I have to sort of resave again in order to restart this process.
Totally. And I think that you know, you've clearly outlined some great benefits of why this tool makes sense. And I know that, you know, the listener right now is thinking, if I want to build my wealth and use it to do things with while I'm here, like done things for my lifestyle, I now have this ability to do that. So that's a really important point of like why we want to use this particular tool to do those things. Like we have to buy a car probably anyway. Why not try to align it with some of the goals that we already are aiming towards in our life? So Kyle, as we kind of wrap here, and we, you know, we could go into other scenarios. We could look at another way to think about the car, but I think the big idea is there is lots of different ways you can utilize that tool, but thinking about that alignment is really important. If you're already trying to do this strategy, if you're already trying to build your wealth, let's try to do it and do these other things at the same time. And this tool is there for us to do. So if that's something you also want to learn more about, if you want us to kind of go deeper into a scenario, want us to look at your particular scenario, reach out to us. Head on over to investedteacher.com/discovery. You can book a call with us, and we can dive into your personal scenario to see what tool makes the most sense for you, and then help you achieve your financial goals. So, Kyle, hey, uh, what we wanted to do in this episode was a few things, and I hope that we did them here. Like, we wanted to talk about aligning those large purchases with those financial goals. We hope we did that here. We wanted to talk about, financial tools that empower you to make $1 work in 2 different ways or twice as hard. I hope we made that clear here today. We also want to explore alternative financing pathways that allow you to be more flexible than, say, some traditional financial pathways. So we hope we did that here for you for any sort of large purchase you like. So it could be the car. We talked about the emergency fund last time, but it could be, I'm thinking about financing my daughter's heading off to university, in a couple of years. It's like, let's start planning for that using the same strategies here so that we're not only just putting money for school, but we're building wealth at the same time.
I love it. I love it. And we will definitely continue the dive here and there. We're not going to, just talk about these strategies all in a row. However, we are going to start looking at various scenarios. The one, education is one that's great. Another one is a really interesting RSP strategy where you can get both. Because again, we are not saying this is the one thing that you want to be doing with your dollars that you want to be investing and building wealth with. You want a variety of strategies. We want to differentiate our strategies, and we essentially just want to make sure that we have the power to do things on our own terms and at the same time have the opportunity fund available to us so that we can do some other investing along the way while still feeling safe enough, secure enough so that we can sleep at night, right? So these are some of the strategies that we're thinking a lot about. And John, I know that both of us are super excited once we get into some of the corporate and business strategies as to why, if someone's not convinced of why this makes sense in, maybe their everyday life in some way, shape, or form. If you're a business owner and a corporate, especially if you have an incorporated business, and you have not used participating whole life policies yet, then you are definitely missing out. So make sure, friends, reach out to us. We love running scenarios for you. Your scenario is super unique. This particular situation is probably not a good fit for you, right? That's the reality. It's a good fit for someone, but maybe not you. So let us help you out with that over at investedteacher.com/discovery. And friends, we will see you in the next episode. So until then, class dismissed.
Just a reminder, folks, the content you heard here today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.
John is a mortgage agent with Bricks Mortgage. That's license M23006803. Kyle is a licensed life and accident and sickness insurance agent and wealth architect with the Pan Corp team, including corporate advisors and Pan Financial.